Our final two presenters, we're moving on from bricks and mortar now to the general subject of rights, responsibilities, and resolution. We have two more presenters, and the first will be Pamela Forward. Pamela Forward is an accredited family, child protection, and workplace mediator who has trained with some of the leading conflict resolution specialists in North America. She's also a registered nurse, graduate of Carleton University, BA Political Science, and graduate certificate in conflict resolution, and MA Legal Studies, Canadian Legal Studies. She has had a varied career during the last 30 years in government, business, and healthcare. An award for Superior Healthcare Services commitment is indicative of her dedication. Her experience included both management and advisory positions at the national and international levels. Pamela.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. And actually, I should thank my co-presenter, Ernie Tanis, as well, because originally he was the only speaker on the agenda, but we got to know each other through our work as independent complaint facilitators linked to the Ministry of Health's Action Line, which is a place where people can call to lodge concerns about services that they receive through long-term care facilities or CCACs. So I thank Ernie as well as your program organizers because they agreed to allow me to speak as well. So we'll be talking about rights, responsibilities, and resolution, which is a little different aspect of how to stay in your home. And one of the most important aspects, of course, about being able to stay in your home is knowledge. As they say, knowledge is power. And so the more you know about your rights, your responsibilities, and what you can do should there be disagreement about those rights and responsibilities, the more power you have. So I'll be talking to you about your rights as it concerns the actual care that you receive in your homes. And my colleague Ernie is going to be talking about your rights, responsibilities, and resolutions around the actual homes themselves. Okay, so where is this stimulus coming from to help people to stay in their homes? Well, actually it's coming from society in general, it's coming from people themselves, it's coming from social scientists who study us, coming from governments, coming from the economy. And why is this all happening? Well, as far as people are concerned, most of us have an innate sense that tells us under what conditions we can best survive and thrive. And for many, that means being in a place where we have some sense of control, where we can have choices, where we can make our own decisions, and can be as autonomous as possible given our limitations. In other words, home, albeit an adapted one. And as for the social scientists and the specialists who study us and try to understand us as human beings, how we live, how we organize ourselves, what makes us thrive or not, they know a lot more about us today than they did 30 years ago, and they're agreeing with that innate common sense that the people have about how they can best survive and thrive. So in terms of the pressures on governments, they're under the gun to contain costs, especially when the economy is under pressure and there's not as much money available to do what they'd like to do. They understand that the costs to maintain someone at home are less than in an institution. And we like to think that they also understand that it's important not only to our financial well-being as a society, but to our physical and psychological well-being as well. As you know, the economy is under pressure. We live in a global community, or even a global village. The world has become very small, and we can't really isolate ourselves from what's happening in the world around us anymore. We have to be innovative and, as they say, do more with less, or maybe it would be better said to say, spend wisely. So then how do we respond to these stimuli? Well, since we live in a democracy, our governments try to respond to help meet our needs, and if not, the ensuing unhappiness in the electorate does have electorate fallout. So they show us then that they understand through legislation and programs, and hopefully they've consulted with us before they come up with them. So what then is some of the legislation that gives us the kinds of rights and responsibilities that are important for us today? I'm going to touch on just two of them that I believe are particularly relevant. The first one being the Home Care and Community Services Act, which was formerly the Long-Term Care Act. And it's the primary piece of legislation covering community-based home and community services. And it provides authority for a significant portion of the services provided by the CCACs and sets out the purposes of the Act. It also details at length a Bill of Rights for clients. These acts, they used to be under the Long-Term Care Act, but now there's a separate act covering long-term care homes called the Long-Term Care Homes Act. And I won't be talking about that one today, but just as a matter of information. So the second piece of legislation that I will be talking about is the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And its recent amendment via Bill 178, and that happened in 2010. And this part will be focusing primarily on the responsibilities for providing safe and respectful workplaces for workers, including healthcare workers, along with some limits on the rights of certain workers to refuse to work in certain environments. So there's a long list of purposes under the Home Care and Community Services Act. There are about 11 of them. I'll just highlight a few of them today. And we did have a handout sheet on the front desk as you came in, which gave the websites for all of these references. So if you need to look up in more detail, you certainly can. So then some of the purposes of the Act are to ensure that a wide range of community services is available to people in their own homes and in other community settings, so that alternatives to institutional care exists. To provide support and relief to relatives, friends, neighbors, and others who provide care for a person at home. To improve the quality of community services and to promote the health and well-being of persons requiring such services. To recognize in all aspects of the management and delivery of community services the importance of a person's needs and preferences, including preferences based on ethnic, spiritual, linguistic, familial, and cultural factors. Another one, to promote equitable access to community services through the application of consistent eligibility criteria and uniform rules and procedures. So that's a few of them, and as I said, if you'd like to read the rest, you can look them up. So the next part is the Bill of Rights, and this is a very important part for people receiving community services. It has been developed and enshrined in the Act in order to protect and promote people's personal well-being and safety. And it outlines the privileges, the choices, and protections available to individuals receiving community services under the Act. And again, I'll read out some of them for you. And the actual website is on the handout. So under the Bill of Rights, a service provider shall ensure that the following rights of persons receiving community services from the service provider are fully respected and promoted. First one, person receiving community service has the right to be dealt with by the service provider in a courteous and respectful manner and to be free from mental, physical, and financial abuse by the service provider. Has the right to be dealt with by the service provider in a manner that respects the person's dignity and privacy and promotes the person's autonomy. Has the right to be dealt with by the provider in a manner that recognizes the person's individuality and that is sensitive to and responds to the person's needs and preferences, including the preferences I mentioned before based on ethnic, spiritual, linguistic, familial, and cultural factors. And you know, these are big tasks, as you can imagine. However, they are enshrined in law. They have the right to information about community services provided to him or her, and to be told who will be providing the community services. They have the right to participate in the service provider's assessment of his or her requirements. And a person who is determined under this Act to be eligible for a community service has the right to participate in the service provider's development of the person's plan of service, the service provider's review of the person's requirements, and the service provider's evaluation and revision of the person's plan of service. That the person also has the right to give or refuse consent to the provision of any community service. They have the right to raise concerns or recommend changes in connection with the community service provided to them and in connections with policies and decisions that affect their interests. And they can raise those concerns to the service provider. They can raise them to government officials or any other person without fear of interference, coercion, discrimination, or reprisal. They also have the right to be informed of the laws, rules, and policies affecting the operation of the service provider and to be informed in writing of the procedures for initiating complaints about the provider. And finally, the person receiving the community service has the right to have his or her records kept confidential in accordance with the law. So I think these are a must-read for everybody and are very important. Then next, I'm going to talk a bit more about the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So the emphasis here is going to be on responsibilities as well as rights. These amendments, which became effective in June of 2010, are aimed at ensuring a respectful workplace and preventing violence and harassment in the workplace. So these changes are relevant in your situations, as when workers are coming into a home, that home is seen as the workplace. So from all of this, I think you're going to see that rights and responsibilities really are reciprocal. We have rights, but we have them as long as we don't walk over or disrespect other people's rights. So just briefly, in terms of what workplace violence means, there's a definition. It means the exercise of physical force by a person against a worker in a workplace that causes or could cause physical injury, an attempt to exercise such physical force against a worker, or a statement or behavior that is reasonable for a worker to interpret as a threat to exercise physical force against the worker in a workplace that could cause physical injury. In terms of workplace harassment, this means engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace that is known or ought reasonably be known to be unwelcome. It also includes bullying, intimidating or offensive jokes or innuendos, displaying or circulating offensive pictures or materials, or offensive or intimidating phone calls. Employers then must have policies and programs that deal with all of these things, and that they must make sure that their workers and clients understand what these programs are and the measures and procedures they must use to identify risks, summon help, and to investigate and deal with such complaints. So what is clear, I think, is that respectful interaction between both workers and clients is in everybody's best interests, and it's in everybody's responsibility to prepare themselves to meet these expectations. So, of course, as in all things, the law also tries to achieve a certain balance. So along with that, then I'd just like to say a word about the limited right to refuse work where risk is inherent in the job. So there is a right under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to refuse or to stop work where health or the safety of the worker is in danger. However, that right is limited and does not apply to certain workers, and I think you will see that this does make sense. For example, it doesn't apply to a worker when a circumstance described in certain clauses is inherent in the worker's work or is a normal condition of the worker's employment, or when the worker's refusal to work would directly endanger the life, health, or safety of another person. And we can see where this makes sense. For example, in the case of a policeman, danger and risk is inherent in their jobs every day. Or a firefighter. I mean, we would be really out of luck if they refused to do their work. Or, for example, a guard in a correctional institution. These can sometimes be dangerous jobs. And similarly, a person employed in the operation of a hospital, a sanitarium, a long-term care home, psychiatric institution, mental or health care or rehab facility, a residential group home or other facility for persons with behavioral or emotional problems or physical, mental, or developmental disability. So again, hopefully we're striving for balance in all things. So next, and finally, I'll be talking about resolution and what happens when there are disagreements about the rights and responsibilities that we just spoke about. So as in most organizations, the organizations that you will be dealing with have internal processes, and there are also external processes. In terms of internal processes, most organizations encourage clients and staff to work together to resolve their differences. And that is, you work directly with the person that you're working most closely with. And there is usually a formal process as well to follow if that doesn't work. And you can ask to see, that person's manager or go on up the line and, you know, speak to the most senior person in the organization. But, you know, for a lot of us, that can be a daunting and intimidating thing. And so, of course, not to mention time-consuming and energy-consuming as well. And so in order to supplement that process in long-term care facilities and CCACs and other organizations under the Act, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care has set up the Long-Term Care Action Line. So this action line was originally set up to provide complaints processes for long-term care facilities, but in 2007 it was expanded to include CCACs. So should you wish the assistance of independent complaints facilitators, which is where Ernie and I happen to meet because we happen to be on a roster for independent complaints facilitators. So should you wish the assistance of one of these people to assist you, you know, in resolving any complaints or concerns you may have, you may request this assistance by calling the Long-Term Care Action Line, and the phone number is here, and also there would be a website on the handout list. So just a word about the ICFs. They are recruited for this special roster by the Alternate Dispute Resolution Institute of Ontario. And should an ICF be required, the ministry will contact the ADR Institute. The ICF is assigned to the case by the Institute. And so this organization is at arm's length. It's independent of the ministry and the CCACs or long-term care homes, and they are made up of mediators and arbitrators. Finally then, I guess the ultimate appeal, should your independent complaints facilitator not be able to help you resolve the issue, and in my experience I have found that quite often, you know, most concerns can be resolved, you know, when people understand each other more fully and more completely. But if not, then there is this body called the Health Services Appeal and Review Board. So appeals to that organization can be oral or written reviews. There are forms to be filled, processes to be followed, and whether or not they're user-friendly, I'm going to leave to the users to comment on. I know they purport, you know, to be easy, and they try to facilitate things. You know, people can represent themselves. However, if an agency decides to use lawyers and you have money to pay for one, then there is a level playing field. But if you have no money and can't get legal aid, then that's a whole other question. There is a bit of a gap there that remains to be addressed. So that then covers my part of our joint presentation, and I'm going to now turn things over to Ernie Tanis, and I'm sure many of you will probably know of Ernie's work through REACH Canada, and he's going to talk about rights and responsibilities as they are related to housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pamela.